came with crutches and, 2 crutches, or walking without crutches, with peripheral neuropathy where they couldn't feel their feet, spinal cord injuries. It just turned into this insane, it was miraculous. And when I asked at the end of the event, how many people have had a healing or change in their health condition, I thought maybe I would see, in our second event, a group of 850 people, I thought maybe we'd see 20. It was 150 people that stood up. And we started passing the mic around, and stories were outstanding. Some latent systems must have been switching on in these people's bodies, because they walked out of there completely different than when they arrived. Now, half of it is getting people past that point. The other half is just the fact that as the energy starts to change, every time you react, you draw from an invisible field of energy surrounding your body and you turn it into chemistry. And the vital field of energy that's being emitted from your body shrinks a little bit. Keep reacting every single day because of some threat in your external environment, real or imagined. You keep doing that, you draw more and more energy from the field, and you have no vital energy for growth and repair. In fact, you feel like you're more like matter and less like energy, more like particle and less like wave. And when we're driven by the hormones of stress, which is about 70% of the time for most people, we force outcomes, we control outcomes, we try to predict outcomes, we fight for outcomes, we manipulate outcomes because we're matter trying to change matter. And there's only a certain amount of things you can do, right? You compete, you do all those things. But when you begin to open your heart and you begin to regulate an elevated emotion.
That sounds like my life as a banker, by the way.
Yeah, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was forcing it. And, you can force it to a certain extent, at least you think you can.
It'll make you sick.
Yeah.
It'll make you sick.
It'll get short-term potential, quote-unquote, gains.
Right. But it's transient. So when people start to open their heart and they start creating an elevated state, and you can train people how to do this, and we measure it, the heart begins to beat in a more coherent way. It begins to produce a measurable magnetic field, 2 to 3 meters wide. That's frequency, that's energy, and all frequency carries information. So now the person lays the intent, the thought on that frequency. And the more elevated the emotion, it makes sense that that thought can only be carried by an emotion that's equal to that thought. In other words, you can't feel unworthy and have the thought of abundance. That energy, or suffering, that thought can't be carried on that energy. It's got to be carried by an elevated state. So, as you're sitting next to a person who's breaking free and opening their heart and giving up guilt for joy, giving up fear for courage, whatever it is, and they're regulating those states, and I'm sitting next to you, and our fields begin to interfere, all of a sudden, if you're coherent and I'm coherent, we're going to create a bigger wave. The higher the amplitude, the higher the energy in the room. So if you have 750 or 850 or 1,000 people doing this, there comes a critical mass moment where I just have to get out of the way, because now I'm no longer, it's already happening. There's a momentum that's going. And so at the last 2 advanced week-longs, we do what's called coherence healing. And I talk a lot about the research that was done out of Yale University about the field and biological systems. And you set a person down, they're laying there, and you have, we call it the cage. You put 8 people around them, 3 on this side, 3 on this side, head and feet. And they begin to raise their energy, and they get beyond themselves. They connect to the field. In other words,
that's an important part of it.
That's a very important part. You can't be thinking, my back hurts or my knees hurt, because if you're doing that, you're not there. You can't be thinking, how long is this going to go? If you're thinking about time, you're still in 3-dimensional reality. If you're thinking, am I doing this right, am I doing it wrong, you still haven't gotten beyond your analytical mind. But if people have been crossing the river of change for 5 days and we start doing the coherence healing towards the end, and all of a sudden they know how to put their attention on that field beyond their hands, they know how to open their heart, they know how to get beyond themselves. And I'm standing on the stage and I'm watching people laying on the floor without being touched. Their bodies are convulsing. Nothing's touching the ground but the back of the person's head and their heels. They're in an arch like this. And the people are just sitting there, they're unaware of it. And that's energy affecting matter. Change the field. you change matter. And I'm witnessing this in the last two events, and people who had broken necks and walking with canes getting up afterwards and saying, I have no idea what just happened, but I have never felt that amount of love move through every cell of my body. That's what I want to be the new norm. That's what I want to be common. And it just takes getting beyond yourself and then directing your attention in the right way, and it becomes a skill. And we've got enough measurements now to know that you can make it a skill.
It's fascinating because my MIT-trained engineer brain is saying, okay, you can't quantify the energy and you can't do all of these things. But I've been in the room when you're with people on these higher energy levels, whether it's some monk that's meditating in the corner, and I feel different than if it's some taxi cab driver that's shouting at someone. Mm-hmm. So like, I've been a part of this, and yet it's not taught in my science to be quantified.
Sure.
And so I'm always going back and forth, but I feel this stuff. I used to be the guy that fought through things as the banker, and now with London Real, I actually get exposed to a lot of these concepts, and I teach kind of the caveman versions that you talk about in your books, But like you said, certain these things can't exist at the same time. You
Sure.
can't be in abundance and also feel this. And so I've seen it work, and it's interesting that you're now taking it to another level and like almost quantifying it.
Well, here's the interesting thing. This will appeal to your engineering mind, and I have an older son that's got a master's in engineering, and we go back and forth all the time. It's hard to measure energy. What you can measure is the effects. It's better to measure the effects of a shift in energy or a shift in consciousness, and you can measure the downward causation of that. And God, after looking at so many brain scans, I can tell you that the moment you get beyond yourself, the moment you disconnect from your identity, you're not a male, you're not American, you're not an engineer, you're not a dad, you're not an athlete, you're not a name, you get beyond all of those things. That's the moment you begin to connect to a greater field of information. Now, once you're there, once you're nobody, no one, nothing, nowhere, and no time, you're pure consciousness. Now you're ready to connect to the unified field. And when you begin to pay attention to it, when you begin to stay present with it, when you begin to surrender to it, experience it moment after moment after moment, every time you interact with it and experience it, you're laying down circuitry in your brain. Why is that important? Because the next time you do it, you have the circuits in place to perceive more of it. And if you pay attention and you unfold deeper into it, you'll experience more of it, which means you'll lay down more circuits. And all of a sudden, as you begin to connect to the unified field, you're connecting to a field of information and energy. What's the relevance of that? Well, you start experiencing more wholeness and more oneness instead of separation, which is created by the hormones of stress. The more you live in stress, the more you become a materialist and you define reality with your senses, because it's important to define reality with your senses when you're in survival.
Right.
So the more you're living by your senses, the more you're believing you're an object in local space and time, and I'm an object in local space and time, and we have some things in common, so we're kind of connected, but God forbid you look differently, or I didn't know anything about you, I'd experience more separation. Well, the moment you get beyond all of that and you're connecting to a unifying field of interconnectedness that's governing everything material, you're going to start to feel the consciousness of everybody, of everyone, of everything, of everywhere, and every time.